Margaret Chen had finally done it. After 30 years of working behind a computer screen, writing code and fixing software bugs for 12 hours a day, she had retired. At 52, she was ready for a quieter life. No more conference calls at midnight. No more rushed lunches at her desk. Just peace, a good book, and maybe some time to work in a garden. That's exactly why she chose Oakwood Hills. The neighborhood looked perfect in the photos. Tree-lined streets, neat little houses with front porches and lawns that actually looked like someone cared about them. It seemed like the kind of place where neighbors waved at each other and kids rode bikes after dinner. Margaret signed the papers without a second thought. Moving day was exhausting but exciting. Box after box, piece after piece of furniture. By evening, Margaret stood on her new front porch, looking out at the quiet street. The sunset painted everything in warm orange light. She smiled to herself. This was going to be good. What Margaret didn't tell anyone, and what you couldn't tell by looking at her, was that twice a week she taught karate at a small dojo across town. She'd been practicing since she was 17. It wasn't something she bragged about or even mentioned in casual conversation. She just loved it. The discipline, the movement, the way it cleared her mind. But in her everyday life, she dressed in simple jeans and comfortable sweaters. Nothing about her screamed martial artist. She was just Margaret, the quiet new neighbor who smiled politely and minded her own business. On her third day in the neighborhood, Margaret was arranging some plants on her porch when a woman walked up her driveway. She was probably in her late 40s, dressed in expensive athleisure wear with perfectly styled blonde hair. Everything about her looked controlled and precise. "Hello, you must be our new neighbor," the woman said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Linda Hartwell. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association here." "Nice to meet you," Margaret said, wiping dirt from her hands. "I'm Margaret. Welcome to Oakwood Hills. We're so glad to have you. This is a really special community, you know. We take a lot of pride in keeping everything just right." Linda's eyes scanned Margaret's porch and lawn as she spoke, like she was taking inventory. They chatted for a few minutes. Linda pointed out which houses belonged to which families, though Margaret noticed she had something critical to say about almost everyone. The Johnsons let their grass get too long. The Patel family's holiday decorations stayed up 2 days too late last year. The elderly couple at the corner didn't trim their bushes properly. Margaret nodded politely, feeling slightly uncomfortable. She'd lived in plenty of places before, but she'd never met someone quite so focused on other people's homes. "Well, I'll let you get settled," Linda finally said. "Oh, and if you need a copy of the HOA rules, just let me know. They're very detailed, but they're what keeps this neighborhood looking so beautiful. I'm sure you'll want to follow them carefully." "Of course," Margaret said. "Thank you for stopping by." As Linda walked away, Margaret felt a tiny knot in her stomach. Something about that conversation felt off, but she shook it away. Maybe Linda was just passionate about the neighborhood. Nothing wrong with that, right? A week later, Margaret found an old wooden bench at an antique store. It was simple but beautiful, with carved armrests and a weathered finish that gave it character. She could already picture herself sitting there in the mornings with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. She placed it on the left side of her front porch next to a pot of flowers. It looked perfect. The next afternoon, Linda appeared again. This time her smile was thinner. "Margaret, hi. I noticed you added a bench to your porch." "Yes. Isn't it nice?" "I found it at that antique place on Main Street." Linda's lips pressed together. It's interesting, but I'm not sure it really matches the aesthetic we try to maintain here in Oakwood Hills. Most of our residents choose more modern furniture, to keep everything cohesive." Margaret blinked. She looked at her bench, then back at Linda. "It's just a bench. I think it looks lovely." "I'm sure you do," Linda said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "But you have to understand we have standards here. This isn't just about what you personally like. It's about the community. What affects one house affects all of us. Property values, you know." Margaret felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice calm. "I appreciate your concern, Linda, but I'm going to keep the bench. It's on my porch and I really like it." For just a moment, Linda's friendly mask slipped. Her eyes went cold. Then the smile snapped back into place. "Well, I hope you'll reconsider. We really do want you to feel welcome here, Margaret, but that means being a team player." She turned and walked away, her steps a bit quicker than before. Margaret stood there for a long moment, staring after her. The knot in her stomach was back, bigger this time. She had a feeling that keeping that bench was going to cost her more than the $20 she'd paid for it, but she wasn't going to be bullied into changing her home because someone else didn't like her taste. She had no idea that this small act of independence had just painted a target on her back. And Linda Hartwell was very good at hitting targets. The war had begun, and Margaret didn't even know it yet. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Margaret found it tucked inside her screen door, an official-looking envelope with Oakwood Hills HOA printed in the corner. She opened it while sipping her coffee. Notice of violation, it read. Your mailbox is positioned 2.3 inches to the left of the approved placement, according to HOA Guidelines, Section 4. Paragraph 12. Please correct this violation within 7 days or face a fine of $50. Margaret walked out to her mailbox and stared at it. 2 inches? She couldn't even tell if it was off-center. She pulled out her phone and actually measured it. Sure enough, it was slightly to the left. Barely noticeable, but technically there. She sighed and spent an hour that afternoon digging it up and repositioning it. It seemed ridiculous, but she didn't want trouble. Maybe Linda was just doing her job, she thought. Maybe this was normal for HOA neighborhoods. 3 days later, another letter came. This time it was about the garden gnome her sister had given her as a housewarming gift. Margaret had placed it near her rose bushes, thinking it was cute. According to the letter, it was unauthorized lawn ornamentation, not listed in the approved decorative items handbook. Margaret hadn't even known there was a handbook of approved decorations. She called Linda that evening. Hi, Linda. I got your letter about the garden gnome. I didn't realize there were restrictions on lawn decorations. Oh, there are very specific guidelines, Linda said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It's all in the HOA packet you received when you moved in. Page 47, I believe. We can't have everyone just putting whatever they want in their yards. It would look like a flea market. It's just one small gnome. It's not hurting anything. Rules are rules, Margaret. If I make an exception for you, I'd have to make exceptions for everyone. Where would it end? Margaret removed the gnome. She didn't want to, but she was trying to be a good neighbor. Then came the letter about her car. According to Linda's measurements, taken with a tape measure and documented with photos, Margaret's car was parked 3 inches over the edge of her driveway, technically on the grass. The letter included printed photographs with red arrows pointing to the alleged violation. Margaret couldn't believe it. Linda had come to her house with a measuring tape while she was gone and photographed her car like it was a crime scene. But it didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret received violations for her trash cans being visible from the street after 8 a.m. on non-collection days, for a small oil stain on her driveway, and for her window blinds being inconsistent with the neighborhood color scheme. Each letter was more detailed than the last, with photos, measurements, and references to specific HOA bylaw sections. Margaret started to realize what was happening. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. Linda was hunting for problems. One evening, Margaret sat down and actually read through the entire HOA rulebook, all 93 pages of it. She discovered that while Linda was technically right about some violations, many of her complaints were either exaggerated or outright wrong. The mailbox rule had a 3-inch tolerance, not 2. The car parking rule applied to overnight parking, not daytime. Linda was either bending the rules or making up new ones. But the breaking point came with the wind chimes. Margaret's grandmother had given her a set of brass wind chimes before she passed away. They had a soft, gentle sound, and hanging them on the porch made Margaret feel connected to her grandmother's memory. They meant everything to her. Linda's letter called them excessive noise pollution and demanded their immediate removal. Margaret called Linda again. This time her voice was firmer. Linda, I'm not removing my grandmother's wind chimes. They're quiet, they're tasteful, and they're important to me. The rules clearly state that noise-producing decorations require approval from the HOA board. Wind chimes are standard porch decorations in neighborhoods everywhere, not in Oakwood Hills, not without approval, and I can tell you right now you won't get approval. Then I guess they're staying up without approval. There was a long silence on the phone. When Linda spoke again, her voice was ice. I see. Well, don't say I didn't warn you about the consequences of not being a team player. The next day, Margaret noticed something on the neighborhood Facebook group. Linda had posted a long message about certain new residents who refuse to respect community standards and think they're above the rules. She didn't mention Margaret by name, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. The comments section filled up quickly. Some people agreed with Linda, talking about the importance of maintaining property values. But Margaret noticed that most people didn't comment at all, probably too afraid to get on Linda's bad side. Then, Linda called an emergency HOA board meeting. Margaret received an email invitation marked mandatory for residents currently under review for violations. Margaret attended the meeting in the community center's small conference room. Linda stood at the front with a laptop and a projector screen. 6 other board members sat at a long table looking uncomfortable. What happened next made Margaret's blood boil. Linda had created an entire PowerPoint presentation about Margaret's violations. Photo after photo of her house appeared on the screen, each one marked with red circles and arrows. Her mailbox, her car, her porch, even a zoomed-in photo of the wind chimes with a decibel meter reading that Linda claimed she'd measured. "As you can see," Linda said, gesturing at the screen like a prosecutor presenting evidence, "we have a pattern of disregard for our community standards. This resident has been warned repeatedly but continues to show a lack of respect for the rules that keep our neighborhood beautiful." Margaret sat in her folding chair, watching this absurd presentation, and felt something shift inside her. She'd been trying to be accommodating. She'd moved the mailbox, removed the gnome, and fixed every minor issue Linda had pointed out. But this was harassment, pure and simple. When Linda finished and asked if Margaret had anything to say, Margaret stood up calmly. "I'll fix what needs fixing according to the actual HOA bylaws," she said quietly. "But I won't remove my grandmother's wind chimes. They stay." Linda's face flushed red. "Then you'll be fined, repeatedly, until you comply or until we put a lien on your house." The other board members shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. No one wanted to challenge Linda. Margaret walked out of that meeting knowing that this situation was about to get worse before it got better. She just had no idea how much worse it would get, or how it would end. Saturday morning started like any other weekend. Margaret was in her front yard, wearing old jeans and gardening gloves, tending to her rose bushes. The sun was warm, birds were singing, and for a moment she could almost forget about Linda and all the HOA drama. She was trimming a particularly stubborn branch when she heard footsteps on her lawn. Fast, angry footsteps. "Margaret Chen!" Margaret looked up to see Linda storming across her grass with 2 other HOA board members trailing behind her. Linda's face was red, and she was clutching a thick stack of papers in her hand like a weapon. Margaret stood up slowly, pulling off her gardening gloves. "Good morning, Linda. Don't you good morning me?" Linda's voice was loud enough that Margaret saw curtains moving in the windows of nearby houses. Neighbors were watching. "Do you think this is a joke? Do you think I'm playing games with you?" Margaret kept her voice calm. "What's this about?" Linda thrust the papers toward her. Margaret could see they were printed violation notices, each one stamped with official-looking seals and dates. $3,000 in fines. "That's what this is about. You've racked up $3,000 in violations and you haven't paid a single penny or fixed a single thing." Margaret flipped through the papers. Some were for old violations she'd already corrected. Others were for things she'd never even been notified about. One claimed her house number wasn't reflective enough. Another said her front door wreath was seasonally inappropriate. "Half of these are made up," Margaret said, looking Linda in the eye. "And the other half I've either already fixed or they're not actual violations according to the bylaws." "I don't care what you think they are." Linda's voice got even louder. "You have until Monday to pay these fines and remove every single item I've flagged, or the HOA will place a lien on your house. Do you understand what that means? We can force you to sell." The 2 board members behind Linda looked extremely uncomfortable. One of them, an older man named Robert, cleared his throat. "Linda, maybe we should discuss this more formally at a proper meeting." "We've had meetings." Linda snapped, not even looking at him. "She doesn't listen. She thinks she's special." Margaret took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She could feel her heart pounding, not from fear but from the effort it was taking not to respond with anger. This was exactly what Linda wanted. A reaction, a fight. Evidence that Margaret was the unreasonable one. "Linda, I understand you're upset," Margaret said quietly, "but these fines are not legitimate. I've read the HOA bylaws front to back. Most of what you're claiming violates the actual rules. If you want to have a real conversation about this, I'm happy to sit down and go through it page by page. I don't need to sit down with you. Linda moved closer, stepping right into Margaret's space. She was close enough that Margaret could smell her perfume, close enough that her finger was practically in Margaret's face. You think you know better than everyone else? You think rules don't apply to you? Margaret's training kicked in automatically. She was aware of the distance between them, aware of Linda's body language, aware of the exact position of everyone around her. But she didn't move. She just stood there, keeping her expression neutral. I think everyone should follow the actual rules, Margaret said, not made-up ones designed to harass people you don't like. Linda's eyes went wide. Her face turned even redder. How dare you? I've given years of my life to this community. I keep this neighborhood perfect while people like you waltz in here and— Linda, please step back, Margaret said quietly. You're in my personal space. Your personal space. Linda let out a harsh laugh. This whole neighborhood is my space. I run things here, and if you don't like it, maybe you should just leave. With each word, Linda got closer. Her finger jabbed toward Margaret's shoulder to emphasize her point. Margaret could see everything happening in slow motion, the way she'd been trained to see potential threats. You need to step back, Margaret repeated, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel in it now. Or what? Linda was almost nose to nose with her now. What are you going to do about it, old lady? Then it happened. Linda actually shoved Margaret's shoulder. Not hard enough to knock her over, but hard enough to make her take a step back. It was clearly meant to intimidate, to establish dominance, to show everyone watching who was in charge. The two board members gasped. Even Linda looked surprised at herself for a moment. Margaret didn't react the way Linda expected. She didn't shove back. She didn't yell. She didn't even look angry. Instead, Margaret simply adjusted her stance, balanced her weight, and looked Linda directly in the eye. You should not have done that, Margaret said quietly. There was something in her voice that made Linda hesitate. Something in the way Margaret stood, perfectly balanced, perfectly calm, that didn't match the image of a pushover neighbor who could be bullied. But Linda recovered quickly. She crossed her arms and smirked. What are you going to do about it? Call the police? Sue me? She laughed. Good luck with that. I've got the entire HOA board behind me. You're alone here, Margaret. Nobody in this neighborhood is going to stand up for you. Margaret was silent for a moment. Around them she could sense neighbors watching from windows and porches. No one was coming to help. No one wanted to be Linda's next target. I don't need anyone to stand up for me, Margaret finally said. I can stand up for myself just fine. Linda snorted. Sure you can. You're what, 50? Sitting around gardening all day? I'd like to see you try. Robert, the board member, stepped forward nervously. Linda, maybe we should all just calm down and— Stay out of this, Robert. Linda snapped. Margaret bent down and picked up her gardening gloves, brushing dirt off them slowly. When she stood back up, there was the smallest hint of a smile on her face. Not a friendly smile. Something else. You know what, Linda? You're right. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I do, where I've been, or what I'm capable of. You saw a quiet woman who likes gardening and assumed she'd be easy to push around. Linda rolled her eyes. Oh, is this the part where you try to sound tough? Please. No, Margaret said calmly. This is the part where I tell you that putting your hands on someone is assault. And if you ever do it again, you're going to find out exactly how wrong you were about me. Something in Margaret's tone made Linda take an involuntary step back. For just a second, her confident smirk faltered. Then she recovered, tossed her hair, and turned to leave. Monday, she called back. Pay up or get out. Margaret watched her go, then looked at the stack of fake violations in her hand. The neighbors were still watching. No one said anything. No one came over to ask if she was okay. Margaret walked back into her house, closed the door, and allowed herself one long, slow breath. Linda had crossed a line today, and soon, very soon, she was going to regret it. Tuesday evening came with a cool breeze and a beautiful sunset. Linda was feeling triumphant. After her confrontation with Margaret on Saturday, she'd spent the rest of the weekend telling everyone who would listen about how she'd put that woman in her place. In her mind, she'd won. Margaret would either pay up, move out, or finally learn to submit to Linda's authority. But Linda wasn't done yet. She wanted to make sure everyone in the neighborhood knew she was the one in charge. That's why she'd rallied several neighbors to attend a women's self-defense seminar at the community center that evening. We need to stick together, she'd told them. Support each other. Show Margaret Chen that this neighborhood is united. What she really meant was, come watch me recruit more people to my side. 5 women from the neighborhood rode with Linda to the community center. The whole drive there, Linda kept talking. Can you believe she actually stood there and argued with me? In my own neighborhood? Some people just don't understand respect. They parked and walked toward the building. Linda still going on about property values and community standards and how some people thought they were above the rules. I'm telling you, Linda said as they approached the entrance. People like her think they can just... She stopped mid-sentence. Through the glass doors of the community center, Linda could see into the main room. It had been converted into a training space with mats on the floor. And there, at the front of the room, stood Margaret Chen. But this wasn't the Margaret that Linda knew. This Margaret was wearing a traditional black martial arts uniform, crisp and clean with a worn black belt tied around her waist. Her hair was pulled back and she stood with a posture that radiated quiet confidence. Around her, at least 30 people sat on the floor in neat rows, all watching her with complete attention. Linda felt her stomach drop. Is that Margaret? One of the women whispered. They walked in slowly, finding seats in the back. A woman at the front was speaking into a microphone, introducing the evening's guest instructor. We're incredibly fortunate tonight to have Master Margaret Chen joining us, the woman said with genuine excitement. For those who don't know, Master Chen is a 5th-degree black belt in karate with over 35 years of experience. She's a former national kata champion and has dedicated the last 20 years to teaching self-defense, particularly to women and children who need these skills most. Linda's face went pale. 5th degree? 35 years? National champion. The instructor continued. Master Chen has taught law enforcement officers, military personnel, and thousands of everyday people how to protect themselves. But more importantly, she's taught them discipline, respect, and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to walk away. Please join me in welcoming Master Chen. The room erupted in applause. Margaret bowed respectfully, then smiled at the audience. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Margaret said, her voice clear and confident in a way Linda had never heard before. I'm honored to be here tonight. Self-defense isn't just about physical techniques. It's about awareness, confidence, and understanding your own strength. For the next 45 minutes, Linda watched in growing horror as Margaret demonstrated techniques with a grace and precision that seemed almost impossible. She moved like water, smooth and controlled. When she showed defensive moves, they were efficient and powerful. When she explained the philosophy behind the movements, she spoke with wisdom that came from decades of experience. The audience was mesmerized. They watched every movement, hung on every word. Margaret demonstrated how to break free from a wrist grab, how to create distance from an attacker, how to use an opponent's aggression against them. Each technique was followed by careful explanation about when and how to use it safely. The greatest strength in martial arts, Margaret said during a break between demonstrations, isn't the ability to fight. It's the discipline to walk away from unnecessary conflict. It's having the confidence to stay calm when someone tries to intimidate you, because you know you don't have to prove anything to anyone. She paused, and her eyes swept across the room. For just a moment, they landed on Linda. But, Margaret continued, it's also about knowing where your boundaries are, knowing when someone has crossed a line, and having the confidence to stand your ground when that happens. Linda felt like she couldn't breathe. Every word felt aimed directly at her. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the front raised her hand. Master Chen, have you ever had to use your skills in real life? Like outside of training? Margaret thought for a moment, then nodded. A few times over the years. But I'll tell you something important. Every single time I've had to physically defend myself, it was because someone mistook kindness for weakness. They saw someone they thought would be easy to push around. And they learned very quickly that they were wrong. She smiled gently. The best part about training for as long as I have is that you develop awareness. You can see aggression building. You can recognize when someone is trying to intimidate you. And you can choose your response. Most of the time, staying calm and setting clear boundaries is enough. People who are used to bullying others don't know what to do when their target doesn't react with fear. Another hand went up. What if someone actually physically pushes you or puts their hands on you? Margaret's expression became serious. Then the situation has changed. If someone puts their hands on you aggressively, that's assault, and you have every right to defend yourself. The key is control. You want to use exactly enough force to protect yourself and create distance, nothing more. But make no mistake. If someone crosses that line, they need to understand there will be consequences. Linda wanted to leave, but she was trapped in the back row with the other women from her neighborhood. They were all staring at Margaret with admiration and respect. None of them were looking at Linda. After the seminar ended, people crowded around Margaret, thanking her, asking for advice, requesting information about her classes. She was gracious with everyone, smiling, answering questions, encouraging people to keep training. Linda finally managed to slip out with her group. They walked to the parking lot in silence. So, one of the women finally said, "That's Margaret." "Your difficult neighbor?" Linda said nothing. "A 5th-degree black belt," another woman added. "And you shoved her? On Saturday?" Linda's hands were shaking as she unlocked her car. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Linda," the first woman said carefully, "maybe you should apologize. Before this gets worse," but Linda was barely listening. Her mind was replaying the confrontation from Saturday. Margaret's calm voice. The way she'd stood, perfectly balanced. The strange smile when Linda had challenged her. "You don't know what I'm capable of." That's what Margaret had said, and now Linda knew exactly what she'd meant. She'd been bullying a woman who could probably take her down in 3 seconds flat. A woman who'd spent 35 years mastering the art of self-defense. A woman who had remained calm and controlled even when Linda had put her hands on her. Linda had been so focused on winning, on maintaining control, on making Margaret submit, that she'd never stopped to wonder who Margaret actually was. And now it was too late. She'd crossed a line with someone she never should have messed with. The question was, what was Margaret going to do about it? Margaret woke up Wednesday morning to find an envelope taped to her front door. For a moment her heart sank. Another violation notice probably. Another list of ridiculous demands. But when she opened it, she found something completely different. It was a handwritten letter on plain paper. The handwriting was shaky, like the person writing it had been nervous. "Dear Margaret," it began. "I don't know how to start this except to say I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. What I saw last night at the community center made me realize what an absolute fool I've been. But more than that, it made me look at myself and see something I didn't want to see. I've been bullying you. There's no other word for it. I told myself I was enforcing rules and maintaining standards, but the truth is, I was taking out my own frustrations on you. When you wouldn't back down, it made me angry because I felt like I was losing control. And control is the only thing I've had to hold on to lately. My divorce was finalized 3 months before you moved in. 22 years of marriage gone. My kids barely call anymore. I threw myself into the HOA because it was something I could manage, something I could fix, something where I could make the rules and have everything be perfect. But I took it too far, way too far. I had no right to harass you. I had no right to put my hands on you. And I especially had no right to try to turn the neighborhood against you. You've done nothing wrong except refuse to let me control you, and I respect that now. I should have respected it from the beginning. I'm withdrawing all the fines. Every single one. And I'm going to the board to recommend we revise our enforcement policies so this never happens to anyone else. If you want me to resign from the HOA, I will. If you want to press charges for assault, I'll understand. Whatever you decide, I deserve it. I'm sorry, Margaret. You deserved better. Linda. Margaret read the letter twice, then walked back inside and made herself a cup of tea. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time thinking. She could accept the apology and move on. She could demand Linda's resignation. She could make Linda's life as miserable as Linda had tried to make hers. But what would any of that accomplish? Margaret had spent 35 years learning that true strength wasn't about defeating your opponent. It was about knowing when to extend a hand instead of a fist. An hour later, Margaret walked next door and knocked on Linda's door. Linda opened it looking exhausted. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I meant every word in that letter. Can we talk?" Margaret asked. They sat on Linda's back porch with coffee. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Linda broke the silence. I watched you at that seminar and all I could think was how calm you were. How respectful. How strong. And I realized that's everything I'm not right now. You're going through a hard time, Margaret said. That doesn't excuse what you did, but I understand it. That's more grace than I deserve. Margaret took a sip of her coffee. Linda, I don't want you to resign from the HOA, but I do want things to change. Linda looked up surprised. What do you mean? You clearly care about this neighborhood. You have organizational skills and energy, but you've been using them to control people instead of help them. What if you channeled that differently? I don't understand. When's the last time this neighborhood had a block party? Or a community garden? Or a neighborhood watch that was actually about safety instead of catching people with the wrong color mailbox? Linda was quiet for a moment. We used to do things like that. Years ago, before everything became about rules and violations. So bring it back, Margaret said. Be the person who brings people together instead of tearing them apart. That's real leadership. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. Linda started planning a neighborhood barbecue. She organized volunteers to plant flowers in the common areas. She actually talked to people instead of measuring their lawns. The transformation wasn't instant. Old habits died hard. Margaret caught Linda measuring someone's fence once and had to remind her to let it go. But Linda was trying, genuinely trying to be better. One evening, Linda knocked on Margaret's door looking nervous. I've been thinking, Linda said. You offer classes at your dojo, right? I do, twice a week. Would you take me on as a student? I think I need to learn some discipline. Real discipline. Not the fake kind where I just boss people around. Margaret smiled. Beginner's class is Thursday evenings at 6. Wear comfortable clothes. And Linda, leave your ego at the door. I don't think I have much of that left, Linda said with a small laugh. Over the next few months, Linda became one of Margaret's most dedicated students. She was terrible at first, clumsy and impatient with herself. But she kept showing up. She learned to bow. She learned to follow instead of lead. She learned that real strength came from discipline, not dominance. In class, she wasn't the HOA president. She was just Linda, a white belt who fell down a lot and had to ask for help. It was exactly what she needed. The neighborhood changed too. The barbecue became a monthly tradition. People actually talked to each other again. Someone started a lending library in one of the common areas. Kids played in the streets while parents watched from porches. Linda still ran the HOA, but now she focused on things that actually mattered. Safety, maintenance, community building. The violation notices became rare and were only for genuine issues. One evening, 6 months after Margaret had moved in, the annual HOA meeting took place. It was the first one Margaret had attended since Linda's PowerPoint presentation of doom. But this meeting was different. Linda stood at the front, but this time she wasn't presenting violations. She was presenting community achievements, photos of the barbecues, the new flower gardens, the neighborhood watch program that had actually stopped 2 car break-ins. Then she did something that shocked everyone. Before we end tonight, Linda said, I need to publicly apologize to someone. When Margaret Chen moved into our neighborhood, I made her life miserable. I abused my position as HOA president to harass her over petty nonsense because I was angry about my own life and wanted to control something. Margaret had every right to report me, to have me removed, to make my life difficult in return. But instead she showed me grace. She helped me become a better person and a better leader. So tonight, I want to present her with our first ever Neighbor of the Year award, because she represents everything this community should be about. Kindness, strength, and the wisdom to know the difference between rules and respect. The room erupted in applause. Margaret stood, genuinely surprised, and accepted a small plaque that Linda had clearly made herself. Later, as people were leaving, Linda pulled Margaret aside. Thank you, she said quietly, for not giving up on me when you had every reason to. Everyone deserves a second chance, Margaret said. You just have to be willing to take it. They walked out together into the warm evening air. Margaret's wind chimes sang softly from her porch. Her grandmother's bench sat exactly where she'd placed it months ago. Everything was exactly as it should be. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to turn your enemy into a friend. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show someone who's lost their way how to find it again. Margaret had learned that lesson years ago in a dojo. But it was nice to see it work in real life too. The neighborhood was finally at peace. And this time, it was the real kind of peace built on respect and community, not fear and control. It had taken a black belt in karate to teach an HOA president what real power looked like. But in the end, everyone was better for it.